David's early life had been so filled with good things that he surely could not have anticipated what a discouraging, difficult decade his 20s would be. His youth had been a series of one mountaintop after another. He was anointed by the prophet Samuel to become the next king of Israel. He was chosen to be King Saul's personal harp player. He slew the Philistines' most ferocious soldier in a one-on-one battle, delivering Israel from their dreaded enemies. He became a national hero. He was best friends with the king's son, and he married the king's daughter. The God that he loved, worshiped, and served was blessing him abundantly, and things just couldn't be any better for him. But all of that suddenly changed when King Saul began to be filled with jealousy over David's great popularity. Saul certainly didn't mind the victory and the success that David's valor had brought to the land. But when he heard people singing that David was 10 times greater a hero than he was, he started to view David as a threat to his own future, to his throne and his legacy, and to the success of his son Jonathan. Saul wanted David dead. Everyone in Israel eventually knew that King Saul had declared David his enemy, and that Saul was hunting him down to kill him. This was a huge turn of events in David's life, from being a national hero to being a fugitive, viewed by his fellow citizens as a villain. Over time, things grew progressively worse for David. He sought help from a priest named Ahimelech, and Saul had Ahimelech murdered. David sought refuge in the land of the Philistines, but once they realized who David was, his life was in danger there. So next, David went and hid in a cave called Adullam, about 2 miles from where he had defeated Goliath. His parents and his brothers came to the cave with him for protection, because their lives were also threatened. David began to attract a crowd of misfits. About 400 men who were outcasts from society found him in the cave and looked to him as their leader. This life of running soon turned into years, and it seemed to be a great contrast to Samuel's promise that David would one day become the king of Israel. It must have felt like things had gotten off track, like maybe it wasn't going to turn out like Samuel had said. As Saul continued to pursue David and his men, David continued to seek the Lord, and the Lord delivered David time and time again. The Bible says Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. David's band of men grew from 400 to 600 as they spent their days fleeing through the wilderness from Saul and his army. There came a point when Saul took an army of 3,000 of his best trained soldiers and chased after David and his men in the rocky hills of En-Gedi. David and his 600 men could see Saul and his 3,000 men approaching in the distance. They knew they were outmanned. So they found a large cave and they hid inside. Then they waited and they listened. They heard the footsteps of Saul's men on the hard stone surface, drawing nearer and nearer. David and his men stayed still and quiet. Saul's men stepped slowly and cautiously, as David's men stayed frozen in place. When it seemed like they were surely about to be discovered, they heard King Saul say, "Guard this cave for a while, I need to rest." David's crew watched from the shadows as the man who was trying to kill their leader walked into the cave, laid down, and took a nap. Pretty soon, he was snoring. The man next to David said, "This is your chance. Don't you see? God has delivered your enemy right into your hands. All you have to do is kill him, and this nightmare will be over, and you'll finally be the king." David said, "No, it doesn't work that way. Whatever else King Saul is, he is God's anointed man. I won't lift a hand against him." But David wanted a way to prove his loyalty to Saul. So he tiptoed over to the sleeping king, and without waking him, he cut off the bottom part of his royal robe. Then David snuck back to his hiding place and waited for King Saul to wake up. When Saul and his men finally left the area, David stepped out behind them and yelled, "My lord, the king!" Saul turned to see David bowed down on the ground. David said, "Who is telling you that I'm your enemy? I was just with you in the cave. See, I cut off a piece of your robe. I could have easily taken your life, but I didn't, because I am not your enemy." Saul broke down and wept, and from a distance he made peace with David in front of everyone. Then Saul led his army back home. But Saul would turn against David again, and David would spend several years more running from him and facing even greater challenges. In God's time, King Saul was killed in battle. And after that long, dark decade of his 20s had ended, at 30 years of age, David became the king, just as the prophet Samuel had foretold. Christian, God will bring you to his best in his timing, if you will learn what it means to wait on him. Stay the course.